Gambler won a ranch and cards, until the widow demanded her home back. He thought winning a man's ranch in a poker game was the luckiest night of his life, until he discovered the widow standing on the porch with a rifle, defending the only home her dead husband had left behind. The cards fell like autumn leaves, silent and final. Thomas Garrett watched Jacob Morrison's trembling hands hover over the table, sweat beading on the rancher's weathered forehead, despite the cool October night. The Broken Wheel Saloon held its breath. 20 pairs of eyes fixed on the green felt where 3 generations of Morrison blood had just been wagered against a stranger's luck. "Call," Morrison whispered, his voice barely audible above the crackling fire. Tom laid down his hand slowly, each card a nail in a coffin he hadn't meant to build. 4 queens smiled up from the table like painted angels of judgment. Morrison's cards scattered from his fingers, a pair of jacks, worthless as desert sand. The silence stretched taut as barbed wire. "Jesus," someone breathed from the crowd. Morrison stared at the cards as if they might rearrange themselves through sheer will. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment, Tom saw not the desperate gambler who'd sat across from him for 6 hours, but a broken man whose grandfather had carved a life from this harsh land with nothing but determination and a dream. "The deed," Tom said quietly, extending his hand. Morrison's fingers shook as he reached inside his coat. The document that emerged was worn soft as cloth, folded and refolded so many times the creases had become permanent scars. He placed it on the table between them, and Tom noticed how the man's wedding ring caught the lamplight, a thin band of gold worn smooth by years of honest work. "The Double M Ranch," Morrison said, his voice hollow as a dry well. 1,500 acres of the prettiest grazing land this side of the Rio Grande. Water rights included. He swallowed hard. "Been in my family since '49. Tom picked up the deed with steady fingers. The paper felt heavier than it should have, weighted with more than legal words and county stamps. He'd won land before, horses, cattle, even a silver mine once in Colorado. But something about this felt different. Final. The crowd began to disperse, boots scuffing against sawdust floors, chairs scraping back to tables. Morrison sat frozen, staring at his empty hands as if trying to understand how everything he'd ever known could disappear in a single moment. "Where will you go?" Tom found himself asking. Morrison looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and distant. "Don't rightly know. Sarah, she don't know yet. The boy neither." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "How do you tell your wife you gambled away her home? How do you look your son in the eye and explain that his inheritance just walked out the door with a stranger?" Tom folded the deed carefully, sliding it into his vest pocket. The paper crinkled against his chest, a sound like dried bones. "Maybe we can work something out. A partnership or no." Morrison stood abruptly, his chair toppling backward. "A debt's a debt. A bet's a bet. I knew the stakes when I sat down." He pulled his hat low over his eyes. "Just give me until morning to tell them. Please." The rancher walked toward the door with the measured steps of a man heading to his own execution. Tom watched him go, then turned back to the table where his winnings lay scattered, coins and bills that seemed smaller now, less significant than they had an hour ago. The bartender approached, wiping his hands on a dirty apron. "Hell of a thing," he said, shaking his head. "Morrison's daddy built that ranch from nothing. Fought off Indians, outlaws, drought, everything the territory could throw at him. And now it's mine," Tom replied, but the words tasted like ashes. "Reckon so, though winning ain't the same as keeping, if you catch my meaning." Tom gathered his money slowly, his movements mechanical. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the saloon's windows and carrying the scent of coming rain. Somewhere in the darkness, Jacob Morrison was riding home to face his wife with empty hands and a broken heart. The Double M Ranch. Tom rolled the name around in his mind as he walked to his room above the saloon. Tomorrow he would ride out to claim his prize, to see what 1,500 acres of guilt looked like in the harsh light of day. He lay on a narrow bed, fully clothed, the deed pressed against his chest like a brand. Through the thin walls, He could hear the wind picking up strength, howling across the prairie with a sound like weeping. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of cards that turned to dust and eyes that held the weight of judgment. Dawn would bring answers to questions he wasn't sure he wanted to ask. But the deed was won, the game was finished, and Thomas Garrett had never been a man to walk away from what was rightfully his, no matter how wrong it felt in the cold hours before sunrise. The morning sun would soon reveal the true cost of his winning hand, and the woman who stood between him and his prize would prove that some debts could never be paid with cards alone. She poured him coffee on the porch where her husband had carved their initials, showed him the graves of 2 baby daughters beneath the cottonwood tree, and spoke with a voice that could cut through steel, but it was her quiet strength that brought the gambler to his knees. The rifle barrel caught the morning sun like a promise of judgment. Tom reined in his horse at the edge of the Double M property, studying the woman who stood on the wraparound porch with the weapon cradled in her arms like a sleeping child. She wasn't what he'd expected. No tears, no pleading, no collapse into feminine hysteria. Just steady brown eyes that seemed to measure his soul and find it wanting. "You be the gambler," Sarah Morrison said. Her voice carried the particular quiet of someone who'd learned that words held more power when spoken softly. Mom. He touched his hat brim, but didn't dismount. Something about her stillness warned him to keep his distance. "I believe your husband spoke to you about our arrangement." "Arrangement?" She repeated the word like it left a bitter taste. That's a fine way to dress up theft. The accusation hit harder than Tom expected. It was a fair game. Your husband knew the stakes. Did he? Sarah stepped to the porch railing, her bare feet silent on the worn boards. She wore a simple blue dress, faded from countless washings, and her dark hair was pulled back in a bun that revealed the elegant line of her neck. She was younger than he'd imagined, maybe 35, with the kind of weathered beauty that came from years of prairie wind and honest work. "Jacob's been drinking since our second daughter died last winter. Grief does strange things to a man's judgment." The words landed like physical blows. Tom felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I didn't know about Emma, about how she fought pneumonia for 3 weeks while the nearest doctor was in Santa Fe." Sarah's grip tightened on the rifle. "Or maybe you didn't know that Jacob blamed himself, that he's been trying to drown that guilt in whiskey and card for months now." A small face appeared at the window behind Sarah, a boy with his mother's eyes and a mop of unruly brown hair. He pressed his nose against the glass, watching the stranger with the curious intensity of childhood. "That's Danny," Sarah said, following Tom's gaze. "He's 8. This ranch is the only home he's ever known." She gestured toward a fenced area beneath a massive cottonwood tree. "His sisters are buried over there. Lucy was 6 when the fever took her. Emma never saw her first birthday." Tom's mouth went dry. The deed in his pocket felt like a stone against his ribs. "Mrs. Morrison, I don't." She held up a hand. "Don't you dare offer me pity or charity or some partnership where I work my own land for wages." Her voice never rose above a conversational tone, but it cut through him like winter wind. "This ranch has Morrison blood in every fence post, every blade of grass. My husband's grandfather died defending it from Comanche raiders. His father broke his back building the irrigation ditches that make this land worth having." She walked down the porch steps, the rifle still in her hands but no longer pointed in his direction. "Jacob carved our initials in that post there on our wedding day. Said it was to mark the beginning of our life together." She ran her fingers over the weathered letters. JM plus SM, 1871. He was sober then. Happy. Full of dreams about the children we'd raise, the legacy we'd build. Tom dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the dusty ground with soft thuds. "Ma'am, if there was any other way, there is." Sarah turned to face him fully. "Right away. Tear up that paper and right away. Let us keep our home, and I'll find a way to pay Jacob's debts. I'll work my fingers to bone, sell everything we own except the land itself. The law says the law." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The law doesn't know about midnight feedings and lullabies sung over sick babies. It doesn't understand the weight of a mother's promises or the sound a husband makes when he cries in his sleep. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of lavender soap and see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. The law is just words on paper, Mr. Garrett. But love? Love is the fence posts and the well water and the graves under that tree. Love is what makes a house into a home. Danny emerged from the house, a wooden horse clutched in his small fist. He stayed close to his mother's side, studying Tom with the wariness of a wild creature. "This is my boy," Sarah said, her hand settling on Danny's shoulder. "Tell Mr. Garrett what your papa taught you about the ranch." The boy looked up at Tom with serious eyes. "Papa says every cow has a name and every acre has a story. He says the land remembers everything, every raindrop, every footstep, every tear." Sarah smiled, the first genuine warmth Tom had seen from her. "Smart boy. Takes after his father, the man his father used to be." The morning sun climbed higher, painting the ranch buildings in shades of gold and amber. Tom found himself studying the neat corral, the well-maintained barn, the kitchen garden where late tomatoes hung heavy on the vine. It was a working ranch, loved and tended, not just property to be won or lost. "Stay for coffee," Sarah said suddenly. "Let me show you what you think you own." It wasn't really a request. As Tom followed Sarah toward the house, where a boy clutched his wooden horse, and the scent of breakfast drifted through open windows, he began to understand that some victories came with a price too heavy for any man to carry. For 3 weeks, the gambler told himself he was just protecting his investment while he mended fences and learned the names of cattle, until the day he realized he'd accidentally found the only thing in his life worth more than gold. 3 weeks passed like water through cupped hands. Tom told himself he stayed to assess his investment, to understand what he'd won in that smoky saloon. But every morning found him at the breakfast table, watching Danny practice his letters on a slate while Sarah hummed softly over the stove. Every evening caught him on the porch, listening to coyotes sing their ancient songs while the boy carved new details into his wooden horse. The work came easier than expected. His hands, soft from years of dealing cards, grew callous from fence wire and hammer handles. He learned that the big Hereford bull was named Caesar, that the creek ran deepest near the lightning-struck oak, that Sarah could predict weather changes by watching the way her chickens roost. "You're getting the hang of it," Sarah said one October morning, watching him guide a stray heifer back to the main herd. She'd stopped treating him like an intruder somewhere during the second week, though her careful politeness never quite warmed into friendship. "Beginner's luck," Tom replied, but he felt a strange pride in the compliment. Danny rode beside them on the old mare, his legs barely long enough to grip her sides. The boy had taken to following Tom around the ranch, asking endless questions about card games and distant places. Tom found himself editing his stories, leaving out the drinking and violence, focusing instead on funny encounters and beautiful landscapes. "Tell about the time you saw the ocean," Danny demanded, settling into his favorite spot on the corral fence. Tom leaned against the rails, hat pushed back on his head. "Well, it's bigger than anything you can imagine. Blue as Sarah's Sunday dress, and it never stops moving like it's breathing. Bigger than our pasture, bigger than 100 pastures. You could ride for days and never reach the other side." Sarah emerged from the chicken coop with a basket of eggs, pausing to listen. Tom noticed how the afternoon light caught the copper threads in her dark hair, how she unconsciously smoothed Danny's cowlick as she passed. The routine settled around him like dust. Morning chores, midday meals at the scrubbed pine table, evenings spent reading by lamplight while Sarah mended clothes and Danny played with his wooden animals on the braided rug. It felt dangerous, this comfort. Tom had spent 15 years avoiding exactly this kind of entanglement. But when Danny fever burned through a bout of autumn sickness, Tom found himself sitting vigil beside the boy's bed, cooling his forehead with wet cloths while Sarah dozed fitfully in the rocking chair. When the fever broke at dawn, Sarah's hand briefly covered his own. "Thank you," she whispered. Tom nodded, not trusting his voice. The morning that changed everything arrived with frost on the windows and the sound of approaching horses. Tom counted 5 riders through the kitchen window, their movements deliberate as stalking wolves. "Company," he said quietly. Sarah joined him at the window, her face paling. "Vega's men." "Who's Vega?" "The man Jacob really owed money to. The ranch was just collateral." Her voice carried the flat tone of someone stating facts about their own execution. "Carlos Vega owns half of Santa Fe and most of the men willing to do his dirty work." The riders approached at an easy lope, confident in their numbers. The leader was a thin man with silver conchos on his hat band and eyes like chips of black ice. He raised a hand in mock greeting as they drew rein in front of the porch. "Senora Morrison," he called. "We have business to discuss." Sarah stepped onto the porch, her spine straight as a rifle barrel. "My husband isn't here. No matter. The debt belongs to the family." His gaze swept over the ranch buildings, calculating. $12,000 plus interest. Tom's blood went cold. 12,000, more money than most men saw in a lifetime. "We don't have that kind of money," Sarah said. "No." The man smiled without warmth. "Perhaps we can arrange alternative payment. This is fine land. Good water. The house could use some improvements, but the bones are sound. The ranch belongs to him now." Sarah nodded toward Tom, who stood in the doorway with his hand resting on his gun, but the leader studied Tom with renewed interest. "Ah, the famous card player. We heard about Morrison's final game." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Tell me, Senor, do you plan to honor the original debts, or must we discuss this matter differently?" Danny appeared beside Tom, pressing close against his leg. The boy's presence steadied something in Tom's chest, cleared away the last of his uncertainty. "The debt died with the game," Tom said evenly. "You want this ranch, you'll have to go through me." The gunmen exchanged glances. Their leader's smile widened. "As you wish, senor. But consider carefully, winter is coming, and accidents happen so easily on isolated ranches. Fires, stampedes. Men disappear and are never found." He touched his hat brim in Sarah's direction. "We will return soon to collect what is owed. One way or another." They rode away as casually as they'd arrived, leaving only dust and the promise of violence hanging in the crisp air. Sarah's hand found Tom's arm. "You don't understand what you've done. These aren't men who bluff." Tom looked down at Danny, who still pressed against his side with the trust of a child who believes adults can fix anything. He thought about the deed in his pocket, about the coffee cups waiting on the kitchen table, about the sound Sarah made when she hummed while hanging laundry. "Neither am I," he said quietly. As winter's first clouds gathered over the mountains and the scent of snow carried promises of harder days ahead, Tom realized that some battles were worth fighting regardless of the odds, and some homes were worth dying for, even if they'd never truly been his own. He burned the ranch deed in the fireplace while snow fell outside, then rode out to face 5 killers with nothing but his gun and the fierce knowledge that some things are worth dying for, even if they were never legally his to begin with. Snow fell like ash from a gray sky, each flake a whisper of winter's promise. Tom stood at the kitchen window, watching the white curtain descend over the double M while Sarah prepared what might be their last meal together. Danny sat at the table, carefully painting a wooden cow he'd carved from scraps, his tongue poking out in concentration. "They'll come with the storm," Sarah said quietly, not looking up from the beans she was stirring. "Vega's men always prefer bad weather. Harder to track them afterward." Tom nodded, his hand unconsciously checking the Colt at his hip. He'd cleaned it twice that morning, loaded fresh cartridges, said the kind of prayers a gambling man saves for desperate moments. "There's still time for you to run," Sarah continued. "Take what money you have and ride south. They want the ranch, not you, and leave you to face them alone. I've been alone before." But her voice caught on the words, betraying the fear she worked so hard to hide. Tom turned from the window and walked to the fireplace where orange flames danced against the gathering darkness. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the deed. That piece of paper that had started everything had brought him to this moment of reckoning. Sarah's breath caught. What are you doing? Something I should have done weeks ago. Tom held the deed over the flames, feeling the heat lick at his fingers. This was never really mine. A man can't own what he steals, even if the law says otherwise. Tom, no, yes. He released the paper and watched it curl and blacken, the legal words disappearing into smoke and memory. There. Now it belongs to who it always belonged to. Danny looked up from his carving. What was that? Just some old papers, son. Nothing important. Sarah stared at the ashes floating up the chimney, tears tracking down her cheeks. You fool. That was your security, your proof of ownership. Without it, I'm fighting for something that matters instead of something I want. Tom knelt beside Danny's chair. You remember what I taught you about poker? The boy nodded solemnly. Never bet what you can't afford to lose. That's right. And sometimes the biggest bet is the one where you risk everything for what you love. Tom ruffled the boy's hair. I need you to take care of your mama while I'm gone, understand? Danny's eyes widened. Where are you going? To settle some business with those men who were here before. But I'll be back for supper, I promise. The lie tasted bitter, but some promises were meant to offer comfort rather than truth. Tom rose and reached for his coat. Through the window, he could see 5 dark shapes moving through the snow-heavy twilight, their horses picking careful paths through the drifts. Sarah caught his arm as he headed for the door. Don't do this. Please. We can find another way. There is no other way. Tom cupped her face gently, memorizing the warmth of her skin, the gold flecks in her brown eyes. Some debts can only be paid in full. He kissed her then, soft and desperate, tasting salt tears and unspoken words. When they parted, he pressed something in her palm, his lucky silver dollar, worn smooth by years of worry and hope. For luck, he whispered. Tom stepped onto the porch as the riders approached, their weapons already drawn. The snow-muffled sound, turning the world into a cathedral of white silence broken only by the creak of leather and the soft thud of hooves. Garrett, called the leader, the same thin man with silver conchos who had threatened them before. Have you reconsidered our offer? I have. Tom walked down the porch steps, his boots sinking into the fresh powder. And my answer is the same. This ranch is off limits. Unfortunate. The man gestured to his companions. Kill him. Then we discussed terms with the woman. Tom's gun cleared leather as the first rider spurred his horse forward. The Colt bucked in his hand, and the man tumbled backward into the snow, red spreading beneath him like spilled wine. The battle lasted less than 3 minutes. When the gun smoke cleared and the echoes faded into the snowy silence, for men lay still in the white drifts. The leader, wounded but alive, struggled to his knees. This isn't over, he gasped. Vega has other men. Then they can join you in hell, Tom said quietly, and pulled the trigger one final time. The storm swallowed the sound. Tom stood among the bodies, breathing hard, his gun hand steady despite the tremor in his chest. Snow continued to fall, already beginning to cover the evidence of violence, returning the ranch to its peaceful silence. Behind him, the door opened. Sarah emerged with a blanket around her shoulders, Danny peeking out from behind her skirts. Tom holstered his gun and walked toward them, leaving bloody footprints in the pristine snow. Is it over? Sarah asked. It's over. Tom climbed the porch steps, suddenly exhausted. The debt's paid in full. Danny ran to him, wrapping small arms around his waist. You came back. I promised, didn't I? Tom lifted the boy, holding him close. Besides, someone has to help you finish that cow. Sarah smiled through her tears, reaching out to touch the silver dollar still clutched in her palm. The firelight from within painted them all in warm gold as the first real blizzard of winter settled over the Double M Ranch. Inside, the kitchen waited with its scrubbed pine table and the scent of beans simmering on the stove. Home. Finally, truly home. The snow continued to fall through the night, covering the graves of 5 strangers and settling like a blessing over a family that had found each other in the most unlikely way, proving that sometimes the best hands are won not with cards, but with courage, love, and the simple choice to stay when running would be easier.